Stepping up to the couch, it's Brian, who led the league last season in cracked screens. But with his new athletic case, it looks like that won't be the case. Touchdown, Brian!
Now, I can already hear you typing your comments just based off of the title. I'm overreacting. That's what you're gonna say, right? The Celtics' struggles this season won't matter in the playoffs. They just went on a 4-game win streak versus the Pelicans, Cavaliers, Timberwolves, and Knicks. Very impressive. 2 500 teams and 2 bottom 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. They have finally gotten back to the point where they can beat teams that they should beat. And meanwhile, the Raptors are stacked like crazy, locking down on defense and knocking down shots led by Kawhi and the new Kyle Lowry, who refuses to decline even though it would be completely understandable. The Sixers were already solid, then they added Jimmy Butler, who's been amazing for them. And the Milwaukee Bucks, with spacing around Giannis as well as Mike Budenholzer's amazing coaching, are also amazing. If Victor Oladipo wasn't out indefinitely, I wouldn't be surprised if they were better than the Celtics this year, and as of right now, they are higher in the standings. And right now, even the fucking Detroit Pistons are a higher seed than the Celtics. But hey, it's only been 24 games for Boston. They could definitely turn it around and still be the best team in the East. Though I definitely think it will be Toronto this year. But the 2018 season so far hasn't been the only reason that I believe that Brad Stevens is overrated. Okay, here's the part where I give a very clear disclaimer, and people still ignore me in the comments section. Being overrated doesn't mean you're bad. Like, at all. It can mean you're bad, but it's not mutually exclusive. Overrated does not equal bad. For example, I think that Magic Johnson is a little overrated, but he's still in my top 5 best players ever, due to the unbelievable amount of help he got during his career, and his lack of a clutch gene. Outside of his game-winning hook in the finals, I think Magic is a little overrated, but still top 5 of all time. You can still respect a player, or in this case, a coach, that you feel is overrated. So with that being said, I think Brad Stevens is overrated. But that doesn't mean that I think he's a bad coach. He's definitely a top 5 coach in the NBA. There are a few guys I'd take over him. Mike Budenholzer and Greg Popovich are the only ones that I would take over him without hesitation. Mike D'Antoni I would probably take over Brad, and Quinn Snyder could have a case. But I'd probably take Brad Stevens 4th. I don't think Brad being overrated is his own fault. I think we as NBA fans, and I'm including myself because I was on this bandwagon, jumped the gun on Brad's potential. Stevens is only 42. That's insanely young for a coach. To put that into perspective, Brad is only 3 months and 4 days older than Vince Carter, the oldest active player in the NBA. That says a lot. Just like young players have potential, young coaches have potential as well. But anyways, I said that this season hasn't been my only issue with Brad as a coach. He has excuses like Jaylen Brown's poor performance and Gordon Hayward coming back from his injury. But let's look at some of the past seasons. Well, more specifically, last season. Because from 2013 to 2017, Brad consistently overachieved, which eventually led to him being overrated. He has without a doubt had an ability to make players play way better than they should, turning a 5'8" Isaiah Thomas into a nearly 30-point per game scorer, Avery Bradley into a 13-point per game scorer, Jay Crowder into one of the best 3-and-D players in the league. The on-court product he had with that roster was no doubt impressive. But last season, with a more versatile roster and a more talented roster, the Celtics had a worse record and much worse of an offensive rating, going from 8th in offense to 18th, from top 10 in offense to middle of the pack. Despite having one of the most efficient offensive players in the league in Kyrie Irving, who averaged 24 points per game on nearly 40-50-90 shooting, he shot 49.1% from the field, 40.8% from 3, and 88.9% from the field. And he had a 61% true shooting percentage for the season. Ridiculously efficient. With that, Brad couldn't create a top 10 offense. But also consider Jason Tatum, who was amazing as a rookie, Jaylen Brown, who was a good shooter in his second year, and And yes, I know that some of the credit goes to Brad for them being that good at that age, but not all of it does. Brad is responsible for getting Tatum and Brown the looks that he did, but not responsible for them making it. Take Jason Tatum's mid-range game, hitting tough jumpers over his defenders. It doesn't matter what coach you have, it takes pure talent to hit these types of shots. Granted, some of these shots are bad for basketball, and we'll get into that later. That's why I've never understood the whole Kawhi Leonard is a system player BS. As if a guy that's hitting mid-range pull-ups and fadeaways and scoring off of ISO left and right is a system player, which is what Tatum did a lot as a rookie, and is doing even more this year. I will say for Jalen though that his 3-point percentage definitely had a lot to do with Brad. Similar to Jay Crowder, he really has no business shooting as well from 3 as he did. That definitely has a lot to do with Brad. There's also Al Horford, who's a great offensive player, and some solid bench pieces like Rozier and Marcus Morris. This team had the offensive talent to be a top 10 offense, but they weren't. There were not 17 teams in the NBA that should have had a better offensive rating than the Celtics, and Brad is very often praised for his offensive genius. I have no questions about the guy's defensive chops, but on offense, he hasn't been nearly as good of a coach as advertised. I see Brad get praise all day for plays like this. Marcus Morris getting a late game 3, sending it into overtime versus the Phoenix Suns, for the creativity that he shows to get Marcus that space, but never see him get any criticism for his uncreative plays or his plays that are just so damn complicated that they fall apart. This modern day basketball coach is a coach for the team that is 7th in long mid-range frequency, meaning that in the modern day NBA where the mid-range game is dead, for good reason, it's the least efficient shot in basketball, and the Celtics are taking them left and right. A lot of this is Tatum being taken under Kobe's wing, which really wasn't that good for him, which pains me to say as a Kobe fan. Kobe has given Tatum the Mamba mentality, and while those shots were great in Kobe's era, it's not in modern basketball. It's not a good shot. Kyrie is also guilty of taking these mid-range shots, but at least he's making them at a good clip. Tatum is in the 95th percentile in mid-range attempts, but he's in the 36th percentile in making them. He's taking more mid-range shots per game than 95% of the league, but he's towards the bottom in percentage. Big shout out to BBALLBREAKDOwn. His video on the Celtics is where I got these stats. I'll link his video in the description. The Celtics as a whole are 19th in long mid-range efficiency, which means they're taking a lot more than league average and missing more than league average. Marcus Morris and Terry Rozier are also guilty of taking these bad mid-range shots. Al Horford often takes mid-range shots as well, but these are usually catch and shoot, not off of the dribble, so they're fine. Despite how bad these shots are, Brad Stevens keeps letting his players take these shots, and it even seems like he's drawing up plays for his players to get these mid-range shots. So many screen plays where Kyrie or Tatum gets a handoff or a screen, and then they immediately pull up for a mid-range jump shot almost as if it was designed for them to do it that way. Another issue with their offense has been a lack of free throw attempts. They're towards the bottom of the league in free throw attempts per game, and that has a lot to do with those mid-range shots. It's hard to draw contact on a mid-range shot. It isn't when you're taking it to the basket. Settling for those shots leads to harder looks and less free throw attempts. And considering how good of a three-point shooter and driver to the basket Jason Tatum is, you would think Brad would make him take less mid-range shots with his ability to do other things. Now you can definitely blame some of this on the players. Tatum is deciding over and over to take these bad shots, but let me use an example of what I'm about to say. Imagine David Blatt, Tyronn Lue, or Billy Donovan having great offensive and defensive systems, but the issue with these coaches hasn't been poor X's and O's. It was an inability to control their players' decisions. Billy cannot get Russ to stop taking bad threes, and in the case of Blatt and Lue, they were just flat out ignored by LeBron James. And take Eric Spoelstra. He did have great X's and O's, but he got completely ignored by LeBron and he didn't stand his ground. This almost led to him being fired in the LeBron era despite him being a good coach on the X's and O's side. Such a good coach that he was a Coach of the Year candidate a few seasons after LeBron was gone. But it doesn't matter how good your game plan is if you can't make your players run with it. At least in the case of Spo, Lue, Billy, and Blatt, they were dealing with superstars with Russ and LeBron. Stevens doesn't seem to have control over his second-year player who is not a superstar. He either A, doesn't know that these are inefficient shots, which no, he's Brad Stevens, he understands that's a bad shot. B, he doesn't care that Tatum is actively looking for these bad bad shots, which I doubt. Or C, he is telling Tatum to stop doing this, Tatum isn't listening, and isn't seeing any kind of backlash from Stevens. My biggest issue with Stevens has to be that I think he isn't as vocal or aggressive as a coach should be. He doesn't punish his players for poor play. I and many other people have said this in the past, and I do stand by this. I think that Stevens has the potential to be the best coach of all time. With the team he has right now, the foundations for the future, and how great of a coach he already is at the age of 42, I think he could be better than Greg Popovich by the time he's retired as well. But one thing Greg figured out early as a coach was that you've got to get on your players to get the best out of them. I've watched a lot of Celtics games in the last 4 years. The IT-led teams were really fun to watch, and when the big trade happened for Kyrie and they drafted Jason Tatum, I became even more of a fan because I was a fan of Tatum coming out of Duke, and I've always been a fan of Kyrie. And the one thing that I've noticed is Brad is 100% calm at all times, which sounds good, but it's really not. He needs to have more passion, not only to his players, but also in the defense of his players. This is a problem that Fred Hoiberg had as a coach, and he recently got fired and replaced by a guy who arguably has worse X's and O's, but has passion and motivates his players. I'm not saying that you have to be Tom Thibodeau and yell so much that you lose your voice and sound like a chain smoker, but you can't be Fred Hoiberg. So that's why I think Brad is overrated. He has all the chops on offense and defense, but he needs to be more passionate on the court and display more control over his players. Doesn't matter how talented of a coaching mind you are, if you can't make your players do what you ask of them, it doesn't matter for shit. That's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and